we're moving right to the next two items. Our talking technical considerations with that, and then potential migration of candidates from the Army Corps. Any other questions about the HDC role before we let Ed off the hook?
Can you just clarify, so would HDC be involved with the billing and capping, or when is the transfer?
Just the construction
just
of the cell
construction
itself.
of the whole.
That's right. EPA will take over at that point. They will fill it. They will be in charge of capping. They'll be in charge of any of the dredging associated with collection of material and placement in the cat cells.
It's like, well, as is the case with any Superfund project, when we finish the capital construction, the state takes over the operation and maintenance. That's how the Superfund program.
I would, just a point of clarification, it was always the hope that a lot of these large projects, the Corps of Engineers has 1 million cubic yards to dispose of. There's additional navigational dredging, the South Terminal project. It was always our hope that they would actually get combined, because it would save you a lot of money in terms of, and environmental damage. If you're only going out there once to build these things, the bigger you build them, the deeper you build them, the less space you have to take from the top, the tremendous environmental benefit from combining anything. This is all based on just EPA proceeding. There's other things that are in play here that may happen, and hopefully the sequence happens that we can have these things happen all at once. More tremendous benefit to the cities in terms of its ecology and human health perspective, and just the benefit for the economics of the city to have all these things combined.
Yeah. I actually have 2 presentations. I have the collection of data, the design process to date, as well as the technical considerations. Some of the areas overlap a little bit, so I apologize for that. I'll try to make sure we fill in the gaps when we get to the second half. Now, between those 2 sections of the presentation, the Army Corps is going to have a discussion about how the CAD cells work and why the sediment will sort of stay in place within the CAD cell. So if you can hold questions on that, well, I mean, I guess they're asking to hold questions till the end, but they'll be talking to those more specific points. So with regard to technical considerations, this is basically the technical considerations associated with sizing of the CAD cell and really siting of the CAD cell, which is something that we're going to probably be moving forward with after this meeting and after we've had a chance to get comments from the public. So essentially, in siting the Lower Harbor CAD cell, there's a number of different properties that we're going to be looking at. This is just some of the properties, but one of those is the geotechnical properties of the site location, the size and consistency of the particulates that are in place, as well as the depth and thickness of those particulates. The potential for interference with existing navigation and marine traffic. The CAD cell will probably be open for a certain amount of time. Right now, EPA is considering a certain number of years to place material within it. As a result, if it's open for an extended period of time, it could interfere with existing traffic within New Bedford Harbor, and we look to avoid that. Interaction with existing and planned CAD cells. I mean, ideally, when you have a certain area that's set aside for constructing CAD cells, you want to make sure you're using them as efficiently as possible to make sure that you're not taking up too much area and there'll be space for future CAD cells. The depth to bedrock is important because if bedrock is shallow in a specific area, you don't necessarily want to build your CAD cell there. You want to build it where bedrock's relatively deep so that you have enough space in order to be able to construct it. Proximity to existing navigational channels. You certainly want to make sure that they're offset from those channels, and if there's any anticipation in the future that those channels may be widened for any future potential use, you want to take that into account when you're constructing a CAD cell. The thickness of the mud layer that has to be removed and placed into an adjacent CAD cell, that certainly drives the process. The larger the CAD cell, the more mud that theoretically would have to be removed. And that's the mud that is impacted by PCBs and needs to be removed and placed into an adjacent CAD cell or otherwise handled. The material that's underneath it is clean and would be disposed of offshore. The potential for the need of a transitional CAD cell, if there's too much mud that has to be removed from the previous CAD cell, you may have to build a smaller transitional CAD cell just to hold the top from the larger CAD cell that you're constructing. And then the need for a channel to access the CAD cell. If the CAD cell is constructed significantly away from the existing navigational channel, you may need to dig a channel in order to be able to access it. So essentially the process, now I know that David's shown sort of a schedule.
I don't want to interrupt the format this. If you want questions later, I was wondering, and if you want to kick this down the road later, why non-tidal or tidal velocity or future stresses related to velocity, whether it's wind or other, is not one of your siting criteria? Because all of these areas are pretty much uniform in terms of.
Well, I think that's something that Army Corps can probably speak to because they did modeling associated with the way sediment transport throughout the water or potential air transport, kind of how that would theoretically impact or how it would play out associated with CAD cell use and construction, and they can probably speak to that.
And Tom Fredette from the Corps will talk in a few minutes, and they did modeling basically, well, let's speak out of school, the surface, the near surface currents and winds do not really affect it. The cell's deep enough, they don't affect the material.
Keep in mind that Apex's role here is to actually construct the cell itself. It's not filling the cell, it's not dredging associated with the cell, it's not placing the material in the cell. So Army Corps will be able to speak to that.
When the state of Massachusetts did its dredge material management plan, it looked at a larger area within the harbor, and it considered things like currents and winds and storm and wind directions and things, and that led them to select the Post Island North area because it's more protected and it has a lower current regime than some of the other places they were looking in the harbor.
As well as bedrock being a little bit deeper, but a lot of that background information is actually on EPA's website. We gathered a lot of historical information that's very specific to the original setting of CAD cells. It was like a 3 or 4 year process that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts went through to determine whether CAD cells were appropriate, where they should be, and they cited out this DMMP area that Dave had shown, and that was between, I believe, 1998 and 2003, and there's a lot of information. The bulk of it is on the Mass Coastal Zone Management website, but we picked out specific reports that were very applicable, especially based on topics that we discussed in the previous meeting, and we assembled them together and EPA posted them on their website. So there will be some additional information. Okay, so the flow chart for moving forward, and again, we're going to talk about the status of the design after Army Corps speaks, but we're going to assemble the remainder of the field data. We have some field data that's already been collected. We'll speak to that in a little bit. We're going to compare and analyze the various siting criteria, some of the criteria that we discussed, as well as perhaps other issues that get brought up today. We're going to determine the appropriate site for the Lower Harbor CAD cell, and at that point, we'll go ahead and move forward with final design and preparing specifications for a publicly bid construction project. After the plan specifications are assembled, the job would be bid out, and then construction would begin. Again, this isn't specifically associated with that timeline. Okay, so this is just a bit of a second topic. This was something that was asked for us to be able to put together, and this interacts again with our later presentation. But sort of characterization of the material of the proposed site. And this is based on the historic data that we've gathered. It was posted on EPA's website, as well as some of the more recent data that we've collected. So essentially, the geology in the CAD cell area consists of approximately 3 different layers, and these layers vary slightly. At least this center layer varies. But essentially, the 4 different layers are recent marine sediments, which are essentially organic silts and clays that sort of sit on top of the previously deposited geological sediments. Glacial marine and glacial fluvial sediments were essentially silt, sands, and gravels, so varying different sizes. Then right above what would be considered bedrock would be glacial till, which is typically a combination, a very highly compacted combination of silt, sand, and gravel, which is usually between 2 and 5 feet in thickness, and then you usually have bedrock underneath that. And the typical depth to bedrock is approximately 70 feet, but it varies a little bit here and there.
Could you read off the vertical scale, sir?
Yeah, this vertical scale is kind of generic. This says 17 feet. This varies quite a bit. This says 49 feet right here, and then this says 5 feet. Okay. So essentially, this is a color-coded map of the data. Now, essentially, we have data points sort of throughout this area, historic borings, that show these varying different layers and what their elevations are. And this is a data package that we have, an electronic data package. It takes, by the way, this is Pope's Island right here. And so this is New Bedford right here. This is Marsh Island right up here. This is Fairhaven over here. So this sort of shows this is the top layer, the elevation of the top layer. And essentially this is the bathymetry out there. Although there isn't a lot of variation in the color coding because what we're showing here, we're going to show a bunch of different layers. And this only shows slight variation because we're going down so deeply with some of these other layers.
Could you say what the red is and the orange, how deep it is?
That's correct. Okay, so the red is sort of, and we measure everything from mean, low, or low water. So this is approximately -5 to -6. This area in here is approximately minus 18 to minus 20, and this area is about minus 30, minus 35, or something like that.
And the significance is the red is,
Red is shallow. The red is shallow, the orange is a little bit
The red
deeper.
is sort of the orange is.
oh, this is just depth, for sure.
This is
Yeah,
the top
this is
layer.
just depth, and the orange is the federal channel.
Yeah, sure.
And
I
then
thought you were
the shelf
showing
that
silk
is,
clay,
yeah,
sorry.
goes up is
Yeah.
red.
Okay, all right, I'm just gonna go a little faster. Okay, so this is the next layer, the glacial marine and glacial fluvial sediments. It's a little bit deeper. Actually, you can see some of the points here, and these are sort of contours that sort of show this layer. It's a more varied layer. You can see you can't really see the channels anymore. That's because it's deeper into the subsurface. This shows the glacial till layer. You can see as it gets darker, as it gets to these greens and blues, now you're getting into deeper areas. You can see that there's some fluctuation in those depths.
How deep is the depths, yeah.
Sorry about that. Blue is, I think, I can't remember.
I think about minus 60.
It turns blue around minus.
40s. That's, I think green is minus 50.
Yeah,
This is
minus
minus
50,
60,
that's about what I'm
minus
getting.
50,
Oh, and I
Yeah,
guess
50, 50s, 60s, and 70s. So greens are sort of 50s, I believe, or 60s. Light blue is sort of 70s, and the dark blue is in the 80 range. Minus 80 means under the water. And then this is the bedrock layer right here. So essentially, when you put
Could you do the depths again? The dark blue, darkest
yeah,
blue
to
is.
be completely honest, I can't read this that well. The dark blue, I'm pretty sure is minus 80, minus 80.
Yeah, I know.
The light blue is in the high 70s, I believe, and the greens, I believe, are in the 60s. So when you So when you combine these layers, we've been able to combine them all into sort of this three-dimensional geologic profile. You can kind of see this is sort of cell 2 right here. There's a little depression right over here. I apologize not being able to sort of rotate this around. But we can also create cross-sections of this layer. It doesn't shade the areas in between. This is just the various surfaces, the 4 different surfaces. And you can see that they're sort of color-coded associated with this. The blue is the bedrock. The red is the glacial till. The yellow is the top of the interbedded silt sands and gravels, and then the gray is sort of the surface layer. So, let me see here. That was even that.
That's the end.
Okay, so you have to pull up the next one. Okay, so now we're going to have Army Corps, I believe, come up and discuss so the particulars of the modeling that they've done and the assessment of Blue Army.
Chad, if I understand correctly, in that sequence of tasks as you ran down it, I'm going to gather data, I'm going to evaluate it. We're sort of in the top 2 slots of the box, right?
That's correct. We've not started finding design.
No, you're still gathering data.
Yes,
There are
and we have not cited the CAD zone.
Understand.
And then the point, Frank, of kind of presenting that was that we do have a geologic model now of what the overall area that we're going to be looking at. So that when we look at various places to site this, at least from the geologic perspective, we can cut cross sections, we can look at surfaces, we can determine what the geometry of each layer that we have considered to be.
You recall a question from the last meeting, why we're out there boring.
Exactly.
When we go back and take a look at what was done in 2002 and 2003, and you answered that.
This is the
Right,
result
there,
of
there are a
that.
lot of other considerations, but
Yeah.
there certainly is a body of information available to do just what you're doing.
Yeah.
And structure out what's there, have a pretty good idea of what's there. Not enough for the contractor, but good enough.
Yeah.
You're presenting this nice generalized view of interpretation of your work. And some of the logs are, obstructions that were kind of hung up. Anything that you saw out there that would affect actually where you would position it in the areas based upon the boring logs that you want to avoid at this point?
Well, as we discussed, there's a large amount of variety out there, of course. But one of the biggest things that tends to drive the location of Quetzal is the depth of bedrock. And you can see there was some variation. Certainly there's one area that certainly has deeper bedrock than other areas. That doesn't necessarily mean it would be the best location for this CAD zone. And so it's one of the things that we'll definitely be looking at.
But nothing generally above that bedrock that would cause you to move.
We found a couple of bumps on the bedrock surface that we were a little surprised to find. Not huge ones, but they certainly, if we hadn't been able to find them, then when we dug the CAD cell, we would have found them and would have had a bedrock spike we would have had to deal with, so that was good. We also found an area of some sort of peatier type deposits buried within the glacial fluvial, which probably doesn't mean anything to a non-geologist, but it was an interesting academic find, but it probably doesn't relate to the site, but we have that information, and if we go to the site, the CAD cell in that area, we can certainly think about what does that mean